Billie Eilish just revealed that she's been living with Tourette since she was 11.
Okay.
So Billie revealed this during a recent interview with David Letterman. She says that she struggles with tics like wiggling her ear and raising her eyebrow all day long. She also says that these tics are very exhausting for her.
Probably.
And often people will laugh at her tics because they think she's just trying to be funny. Now she says that people finding her tics funny makes her, quote, incredibly offended. What do you guys think of this?
Apparently she disclosed this a few years ago. It's not recent, but so like I personally I resonate with that. Like I'm somebody who has Tourette's as well. Like I have tics and like they're involuntary. I've had people make fun of them. I've had people even question that I even had them. They were like, "Oh, I think that it's all in your head." It's really upsetting. It kind of fucks you up a little bit. And that's because like I have the ability to control them for the most part. So when, like on stream, like I can't. Like I literally they'll come out sometimes. There's nothing I can do. But when I'm with somebody, like I can delay the tic so that you can't see it. You know what I mean? It sounds so weird to say. Like I can control it, but like I get a lot of distress if I just don't engage in the tic. You have Tourette's, then I should name every single tic. Very good. Yeah, I remember one guy say, "Why are you winking?" Yeah, see, now I'm gonna start winking or doing like close my eyes. I can understand that. I'll say the one thing, and this is probably the same for her and me, is like it can get like kind of exhausting and go engaging in tics, especially under high stress. Like especially I have one tic where like I don't want to start doing it because I'll start doing it, but like I like violently shake my head and like really hurts my neck. It's so bad. If I'm really stressed, that's the one that always comes out, and then I'm sitting here like I'm gonna okay, like I do that. And then I like violently shake my head and like I have to like hurt myself a certain amount before I feel satisfied. It's very stressful. The good thing is though that like myself, Billie Eilish, probably the same thing. The fact that she has the ability to hide it probably means that it's not as bad as most people have Tourette's. So this is one of those conversations of like different things on a spectrum. So like my Tourette's are probably the same as Billie Eilish. They suck, but they're not as bad as somebody with like more intense Tourette's. So that's the good thing. I just want to bring it up because I feel like a lot of people. I feel like we're living in the age of disability where everybody has a disability. I know this sounds so weird. It might be difficult to follow my logic here, or it might be difficult for me to articulate myself here. But like everybody to an extent can identify with some kind of a disability. 100%. Like I have Tourette's, of course. But like I wouldn't consider myself somebody with Tourette's, if that makes sense, because I don't feel that it interrupts my life in an extreme way to a degree where I would consider myself somebody with like a disability. You know what I'm saying? Same thing with like my ADHD. I have it very much under control now. I don't think that it impacts my life enough for me to be like, I have ADHD for context, but I don't know. I always grew up like with the idea that like don't use your disabilities as an excuse. So like I don't, but some people use it as an excuse. I'm not saying Billie Eilish, but nowadays you have people on TikTok where they're like self-diagnosing themselves with like autism or whatnot, or they're even going to doctors and they're getting diagnoses that they want because they want to have ADHD or what's like. If you look at like the symptoms for like ADHD, anybody can get diagnosed. Like you probably like if I look up. If I look up the symptoms of like ADHD, being unable to sit still, especially in a calm or quiet surrounding, constantly fidgeting, being unable to concentrate on tasks, excessive physical movement, excessive talking, being unable to wait their turn, acting without thinking, interrupting conversations. These are things that I like legitimately can identify with. Like for instance, and part of it's like a memory thing, but like when I have a thought, like I kind of have to express it. My wife knows that, just so let me interrupt her and I'll like go express my thought, or I'll forget it, or like it's weird. It's hard to say, but I still try to control my shit. Most people can identify with these to a point where they can get a diagnosis, because I think that we have a culture of people who want to have disabilities rather than a culture of people who don't want to have disabilities. Right? Like I don't want to have a disability, or disability. I don't want to consider it my disability for me because it doesn't impact my life in like a profound way. So like I don't want to say it like that. But I have this like issue, but I don't want to. That's how you should interact, because that means that even if I have it a little bit, it doesn't necessarily mean that I need help, and I'm not going to victimize myself over it. Nowadays, I feel like people are forcing and even possibly faking symptoms just so that they can get diagnoses. I think it's happening with like ADHD. I think it's happening with like autism. I think it's certainly happening even like outside of disabilities, like when it comes to people that are like non-binary. I think that people like to do it because part of it is quirky. I'm not saying that trans people are just doing it for attention, but I'm saying that there are some people who are stealing stolen valor. They're stealing disabilities, and they're stealing disabilities, and then they're stealing like identities so that they can feel more unique and they can feel more special. so that they can get more attention for it. There is like an entire infrastructure and culture of disability. I find it insane. I find it insane, and I think that people who do that, I think that it's kind of pathetic. I just think it's kind of pathetic, because you shouldn't want to be oppressed. Because true oppression is horrible. So you wouldn't want to be oppressed. If you're somebody who's finding your, and there's no way to regulate this from like a public perspective, because you could just look up the symptoms of a thing on the internet, and then you can act it out. Boom, you're done. It is that simple. All you could really say is like, I think it's pathetic that if you're somebody who does that, like you need to have like, you need to be more respectful of yourself and other people, because you're effectively you're stealing attention away from people who need it, and you're stealing like actual infrastructure. When you get falsely diagnosed and you require some kind of governmental support system for some kind of diagnosis, potentially, all you're doing is taking resources away from other people. But then also what you're doing is you're downplaying people who have more serious issues. Like, for instance, people who fake having autism, even if they get like a fake diagnosis by like acting out the symptoms. What you're doing is you're showing people a world where like people with autism, like, this is so hard to articulate. There are different spheres, or there's different spectrums of like having autism. We're seeing so much autism that doesn't seem particularly impactful of somebody's life, that in the public opinion, they're not looking at autism in the right way, or other disabilities in the right way, where a lot of people need serious help. And there's a lot of people who have autism, or even claim to have autism, that they say they're advocates for things when they don't really know the experience of somebody that's incredibly like low functioning. And I've met a lot of people who are and even what you consider high functioning, to the point where these labels are considered like so derogatory, which they're not. They're not derogatory labels. I've met people, because my wife is an advocate for these people. She's a behavioral specialist for adults with autism and Down syndrome, like adults with disabilities, like intellectual disabilities. It's a real thing. And they're very smart people. A lot of people, like for me, this has been a personal journey of like people with Down syndrome and autism being more humanized to me, because I come from a very ignorant perspective. But the way that people with autism are represented in like mainstream on TikTok is as if you'd think that there was no issue. And I'm not saying that you can't have autism that's like more less impactful on your life. I don't know. I feel like there's not the proper representation for people with autism, and even with Down syndrome. And I think to tie this off, fundamentally, I can communicate that there's not enough representation in the intellectual disability community, because we still use the R slur a lot, right? And people don't care. We don't use the N word because it's offensive to black people. We don't use the F slur usually because it's offensive to gay people. We don't use a lot of different words because they're offensive to people, but we use the R word in edgier spaces. And people are like, yeah, I don't really care. I don't really care. Well, that's really not for you to say, right? Like, I personally try not to use it. Like, I've used it before on here when I get like really irritated. Obviously, even I have work to do. But the problem is that like people, like, it legitimately upsets people with intellectual disabilities to use the R slur if you talk to them. But a lot of people don't talk to people with intellectual disabilities. And if they do, they're not talking to people with like deep intellectual disabilities that like have a profoundly negative impact. Right? So like they'll talk to like the person with autism who has very little negative impact on their life. Where if you talk to somebody that's like has an intellectual disability that requires like support in the system, they're like, yeah, please don't use it. We watched that Jubilee video about people with Down syndrome, and they're all like, yeah, I really wish you wouldn't use that word. Right? But like, no, it doesn't depend on how you use it. You can use it, like, listen, use whatever word you want to use in private. But like, it's like a public thing. Yeah, that's a good example. Not like somebody said Bo Black said it's okay. I think he has autism, and that's totally fine. But like, if you notice, like, when it comes down to it, if you talk to people with like intellectual disabilities that requires them to be on like some kind of a public support service, like, please don't use that word. You know what I mean? And I feel like we don't have the proper representation. We don't care about those people that are like what we consider lower functioning because we just think they're stupid. That's how our society perceives them. That's just the way it is. And so, like, yeah, like, obviously as a society, there's a lot of problems when it comes to people with disabilities and the way that we interpret them. So Something to keep in mind. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and another special shout out to all my Patreon and Twitch subs. If you'd like to support this channel further than you already have by just watching the video alone, go down to the links below where you can sub on my Patreon, which will allow you to get your name on this beautiful black wall. Or you can go to the Twitch page and you can actually use a free Amazon Prime sub, if you have Amazon Prime, to subscribe. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.